Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. As the 2018 Baselworld novelties begin to find their way to us, I'm proud to continue sharing some of the highlights of the 2018 Bell & Ross catalog, and today we're discussing the vintage series BR-V292 Steel Heritage. Bell & Ross designers are students of history, and this one is evocative of the best sports watches as well as aircraft flight deck features of the 1960s, broadly designed as a love letter to that period. Nevertheless, this is a contemporary 21st century luxury watch in fit, finish, and materials. We may as well start by describing the watch the way, frankly, only the eye and example can on the wrist. This is how we wear our watches, and you can see 41 millimeters across the round of the case, not including crown or crown guards. Though the design is vintage inspired, 41 millimeters is a contemporary men's dress watch size. You'll note what Bell & Ross describes as the ultra-domed sapphire, so it has the look of vintage plexiglass distortion, that romantic bubble-like effect, but it also has the scratch resistance of modern sapphire. And you'll find that when you include that lofty sapphire, the watch is still a very manageable 11.7 millimeters thick, and with a sloped case flank and domed sapphire, any dress cuff, including the sleeve beneath the jacket, will easily surmount this case. Lug-to-lug, it's a versatile size, 47.9 millimeters. I've often said that for a smaller male wrist, roughly 16.5 centimeters circumference down to 14, you want a watch that's 50 millimeters lug-to-lug or fewer. And the BR-V292 is absolutely that. It's that and then some. I have to say that the watch is comfortable, handsome, and actually wears more compact even than it is. First, let's talk about the strap, because the strap is part of the highlight of the design. Vintage inspired in that it looks like a tropic style strap from the 1960s. You can see that characteristic cross-hatching pattern on the top. It has lateral striations that sort of border it and provide a frame for the sheer of the sides, but then on the underside there are evacuated portions that are symmetrical across that allow the strap to be thinner in cross-section and thus more flexible, but also to create an air pocket that prevents moisture, sweat, heat, and grit, oils of the skin from getting trapped against the skin on a hot day. You'll note there is a faceted Bell & Ross steel pin buckle, corresponds to the steel finishing of the case, a combination of facets and longitudinal striated metal, handsome, thoughtfully designed, and easily adjusted on the fly. Your wrist may expand or contract during periods of activity, inactivity, hot or cold weather. Bell & Ross is ahead of the curve. One of the most enduring elements of vintage sports watches must be the relatively compact and elegant case bands characteristic of the 50s and 60s sports watch class. They were never oversized in profile, never thick, never gargantuan blocks atop the wrist, and Bell & Ross has accurately recreated that aesthetic in profile. There's a flowing compound curvature about those splendid and tightly curved lugs that is a throwback and at the same time ergonomically excellent. You can see that even if your wrist is very small, because the lugs fall away in a taper rather than flare out stridently, they're not going to flow out over the edge of your wrist and create an awkward aesthetic. They're nicely blended. The case band is of polish, the lug hoods are of satin finish, and that contrast is much appreciated. You'll also note in profile that the crown guards are rather minimalist. They're sufficient to protect the crown against blows and shearing, but in the fashion, once again, of the 60s, they're not oversized, squared off, sheer, or awkward. They're handsome. They're sufficient. Just enough to protect the crown and nothing more. The bezel features a rich, vintage-inspired vertical knurling on its flanks that makes this bidirectional aviator-style bezel quite easy to use. Now you can see on the wrist, you can use that bezel as an easy reference. Line it up with the hour hand to time a longer interval. Line it up with the minute hand to time a shorter interval. I've often said that a rotating bezel is better than a chronograph because you get 60-minute calibration and you also get easier reference. It's simply more convenient to look at a large radially arrayed scale than to read a small subregister on a mechanical chronograph. Now, of course, the bezel is bidirectional because that is aviation inspired. To this day, aviation bezels move in both directions, dive bezels move in one. And you'll note that there is a high contrast silver and black anodized aluminum insert that can never be shattered. So you may have seen ceramic inserts, but the advantage of anodized aluminum is that it can't be cracked or fractured, so it's got durability on its side. The dial is vintage inspired with an array of tones as well as quarter Arabics that take you back to the period. The dial coloration is carefully chosen. Bell & Ross describes the luminova that's used on the hands as well as the indices and numerals as sand-colored, which is a poetic way of referencing the patinaed radium from vintage watches that takes on this subdued and beautifully rich warmth over time. This watch has all of that color, but unlike those old sports watches that have faded, this one actually works, and yes, there will be a lume shot. The hands themselves are a highlight. As you'll note, high contrast, a beautiful Delta-style aviation-inspired counterweight to the constant seconds. You'll note that there is a broadsword-style hour hand, and then a long baton-style minute hand for easy reference against the radial scale. There's a discrete date window at 4:30 with a nicely tapered facet about its aperture, so it's somewhat stepped and tapered. It's not a sheer cut from the top of the dial down to the disc. There's a bit more of a progressive slope that I appreciate. It's also unobtrusive in that the monotone black disc and the minimal aperture don't distract you from the artistic composition or functional calibrations of the dial. Effectively, the date is there when you want it and disappears when you don't. You can see 100 in a shock of vintage-inspired red, blazon at 6 o'clock. And yes, although this is an aviation-style timepiece, it does feature 100-meter water resistance, so it is suitable for swimming. Now, there is a screw-down crown, and that screw-down crown is used to control a Bell & Ross caliber 302, 25 joules automatic winding, 38-hour power reserve with a smooth bidirectional action that neither rattles or rumbles. It's based on an SW300 ultra-thin and, I must say, ultra-tough base, and you get a nice little sapphire caseback view of the mechanism inside your Swiss machine. So a Swiss time machine that takes you back to the 1960s and yet still functions as a 21st century sports watch, whether you're an aviator, an armchair aviator, a skin diver, or simply lounging on the beach. This one's ready for an active lifestyle, just in time. A 2018 Bezel World novelty, ready for summer 2018. You can see it and the entire Bell & Ross collection and learn more on our website, govbergwatches.com. As you can see, sand-colored luminova has plenty of punch by night. No difficulty discerning hours or minutes. The quarter Arabics are beautifully blazoned, as are the extended indices. You can see this one by the light of day on our website, govbergwatches.com.